There's one prep you might not have covered yet. Stick around because we're going to talk about it. Hey guys, it's Jara with Wicked Prepared. Welcome back to the channel. Most people start prepping for emergencies by stockpiling food and water. And then the next logical step is to add some way to heat or cook that food if the grid goes down, and to boil water for cooking, cleaning, or to make it safe for drinking. Some sort of emergency stove is a pretty easy thing to add to your preps. But what about a way to bake when the power's out? Today, I'm going to go over 5 different options for baking without electricity. Before we get started, why would you need to bake? Well, you probably don't need to bake. This should definitely not be one of the first preps that you worry about. But if you're pretty well set in all those other areas, you might want to think about some sort of oven or way to bake. The first reason that comes to my mind is bread. Bread is not something that you can store long-term or stockpile for emergencies. So many people store ingredients instead for making bread, but that won't do you any good if you don't have a way to bake it. You might want to bake a cake if the power's out for a few days or a few weeks. It might be somebody's birthday or a special occasion. And having some sort of oven just opens up a lot more options for different meals. It's not unusual after a storm or another event for some people to be left without power for weeks at a time. If this ever happens to you, you might be thankful for another meal option. Let's get started and I'll show you my top picks for baking without electricity. Be sure to stay till the end because I'm going to give you a couple of bonus ways to bake, and you may not even have to buy anything at all. This is a Camp Chef outdoor camp oven. It's made by Camp Chef, and this one runs on propane. Now, I'm going to go over pros and cons of all of these different ovens or baking methods. So I'm going to tell you first what I really like about this one. One thing that I really like about this one is that, well, first of all, because of the fact that it runs on propane, it is very easy to bring it up to temperature. It's very easy to maintain the temperature. It's very easy to achieve higher temperatures, which can be difficult sometimes with these alternative ovens and ways of baking. It has this gauge right here that lets you keep track of the temperature really easily. Of course, the knob for the oven, it is self-igniting, so it will light itself when you turn it and you want it to. But besides the fact that you can achieve the high temperatures and you can regulate it really easily, I love the fact that this oven actually holds a 9x13 pan. This is the only emergency oven that I have that I am aware of that will hold a 9x13 pan. Because of its size, it's not super portable. Now, of course, it does have the handles, so it is somewhat portable, but it's not necessarily something you're going to throw in and bring along with you someplace unless you have a lot of space. I do think it could be very useful if you have the space. This could be used for other things besides power outages, like if you go camping or you have a camp that doesn't have power. This would be a great thing to use there as well. And then it's not just sitting around waiting for a really bad situation to have to use it. This oven did come with the regulator. This is designed to run off of the 1-pound propane bottles, the little green bottles. And I believe the website said that it can run for 7 hours at 350 on one of those bottles, which I thought was pretty impressive. But what we did for using it at home is we bought we probably already had this around, an adapter hose so that we could use it with our grill tanks so that we have a lot more propane to work with. One more drawback of this oven is the fact that this one has to be used outdoors. It's meant to be used outdoors. It runs on propane. Now, I'm sure there's people out there who will say that they use their outdoor propane camp appliances indoors. And that's something that would be a personal choice of somebody, you got to do your own research and decide what you're comfortable with. Me personally, I prefer to use something else indoors that I feel like is safer for indoors. That's just my personal choice. Of course, by the same token, I use my butane camp stove indoors all the time, and I feel very comfortable doing that based on what I've researched. And I'm sure that stove probably has a warning that it's for outdoor use only. So that being said, I do want to say that anytime you're using any kind of alternative fuel in your home, alternative appliances in a power outage, anything like that, you definitely want to make sure that you have some safety items on hand. You want to make sure that you have a fire extinguisher and a carbon monoxide detector, preferably one with the digital readout, and make sure that it can take batteries. These are things that we should all have in our house all the time anyways, but we keep an extra with our emergency gear just to know that we're going to have them nearby if we're using some sort of different fuel in our home that we don't typically use. But this is something that I would use outdoors. We use it outdoors. Of course, you can use it in a covered area like a covered porch, or we will run something like this just inside the open door of our garage that has plenty of ventilation. So you can have it undercover, but an important thing to remember is that think of a lot of the reasons that people tend to lose power for a long period of time. Often it's something like a hurricane or an ice storm, things like that. And what happens in those cases is the storm might last 1 or 2 days and knock out the power, but the power might be out for many weeks afterwards. So you might have perfectly good weather that would be perfectly pleasant to cook outdoors other than those first couple days of the storm. And so that's something to definitely remember when you think about using your outdoor appliances. Another option, if you like the idea of the propane oven, but you can't afford to buy one, or maybe you don't have room to store one, is this little Coleman stovetop oven. So this folds down flat, but you can open it right up and it makes a small box-shaped oven. And it's the perfect size to fit right on top of your Coleman camp stove burner, or any camp stove burner really on a full-size camp stove. And so it uses the heat from your burner to heat the oven, and it does heat up pretty quickly, and you're able to achieve a pretty high temperature with these ovens. It's a little bit difficult to regulate the temperature, or maybe that's just my impatience, but I found, like, for instance, I cooked cornbread in this oven and the top got a little bit browner than it usually does in the regular oven, probably because of the small space and the fact that I was having a harder time regulating the temperature by adjusting my stove knobs. However, this oven is a lot less expensive than the larger ovens, and it is a lot easier to store. You can see how very thin this collapses down to. It's also a great option for bringing camping. It is a smaller oven, so you cannot fit a 9x13 pan in here by any means. About an 8-inch square, 8-inch round pan is about all you're going to get. So depending on what you're cooking, you may have to do it in shifts. But it is a handy little oven, and it's a less expensive option that works pretty well. Next up is a solar oven, and this is a Sun Oven brand. Sun Oven is basically regarded as the best in the solar ovens, I believe, and that's why I definitely wanted to go with this one, because this is sort of a category of products that I'm not 100% sure about, and so I thought it would be best to go with the best. This is actually upside down here on my counter. It's kind of hard to orient it correctly inside, so I'm going to put some other video clips up here of one of the times that we've had this in use. Now, the Sun Oven, of course, works with the energy of the sun. That's one of the biggest benefits of this type of oven, a solar oven, is that it doesn't need any fuel. So there's no fuel to store, there's no fuel to buy, there's no fuel to run out of. So as long as you have the sun, you always have power for this oven. But that's also one of the biggest drawbacks. Just like any other solar powered equipment, if the sun isn't out that day, then you really can't use the oven. And that's something that you have basically no control over. The Sun Oven does have this big reflective panel that opens right up and forms a big sort of funnel all around the entire oven. And this is what captures and reflects and concentrates all of the sun's rays into the oven itself. And you can see that the inside of the oven is black, so it's going to also absorb the most heat that it possibly can. The rack in the Sun Oven is designed to hang and swing, and that's to keep it level, because when you use the Sun Oven, you have to tilt it depending on the angle of the sun at the time that you're using the oven. So it has these little pieces right here, and this is designed to help you orient it completely correctly to the sun, to make sure that you have the best possible angle to get the best possible heat from the sun. And just like with a solar panel for your solar generator or something like that, if it's not 100% spot on, it doesn't mean it's not going to work at all. It just means you're not going to get as much heat out of it as you would if you had it completely properly oriented. So the oven has a little stand in the back, like a little pole that can adjust, that helps you to angle it. And it also has something to tie it down to make sure that it's not going to tip or blow over. It also has an oven thermometer built right into it that you can see through the door, so you can keep track of the temperature as it heats up. Some of the other downfalls of a solar oven like this: number one, it is pretty large and bulky. Other than the fact that the sun reflector folds flat and folds right into it, you really can't break it down any smaller than this. So if you don't have a lot of storage space, this might not be the option for you. It's not as heavy as it looks, though. And it does have a carrying handle that will allow you to easily carry it around. It's not heavy, it's just bulky. Besides the size, another negative to this type of oven is that these are actually pretty expensive. Actually, this is the most expensive of all the options that I'm showing today. Now, there are other brands of solar ovens that are less expensive. I haven't tried those, so I cannot speak to how they work, but if there's anyone out there that has used any other types of solar ovens, I would love to hear your reviews down in the comments so that everyone can see what the other options are like. Some of them are very long and tubular shaped, so you're limited with what you can put into them. So that was something I also considered. This oven will not quite hold a 9x13 pan. It's a little bit too small for that, but it will almost hold a 9x13 pan. And one little tip is if you use the disposable foil pans, then you can actually bend them a little bit and manipulate them to fit into spaces you might not otherwise be able to fit them into. I know some people, including myself, are trying to get away from using aluminum cookware for their food and having aluminum touching their food, but I don't know if maybe putting like a parchment paper liner would help with that situation and using those aluminum disposable pans, because I also find for emergencies, those are really kind of nice to have because you're not going to want to have a lot of extra dishes to wash. Another option is you can always build something like this yourself. And I'm sure you could do that for a lot less money than you could purchase this. But that's one of those things where you have to weigh your skill level against the amount of time you have versus the amount of money you have. But this was definitely a purchase that was saved up for and considered to be an investment. Another drawback of cooking with a solar oven is it is a little bit more difficult to achieve the temperature that you want and to maintain the temperature that you want using a solar oven. At least that's been in our experience, especially if it's not as sunny of a day. Like if the sun is going behind the clouds and in and out of the clouds, that can be a little bit more difficult. I also found that inside of this oven got a little bit more moist and steamy than some of the other options with certain things we've cooked. And so if I wanted to have like a topping that was going to crisp up on, say, a casserole, I don't think that would have worked quite as well. So we added the topping later. But with a sun oven, you can expect that you might be doing more of a slow cook, like more of a low and slow cooking rather than a really high, hot, fast cooking temperature. Next, I want to talk about this little Instafire Ember oven. I really love this oven, and what's special about this one is that this is the only one out of all these options I'm going to show today that is designed to safely be operated indoors. So I think this is definitely worth having. This is a mid-range as far as budget. This is not the least expensive option I'm showing today, but it's also not the most expensive. It is a pretty reasonably priced item for what it is. It's actually really beautifully designed. I think I really love the wood and the way that it looks. Of course, ours has been used a little bit, so it's not in perfect condition. None of these things are because these have all been used. But I would say that is the biggest benefit of this oven is the fact that it can be run indoors. And how it does that is it uses canned heat as a fuel for indoors. Now, these are pretty inexpensive. They're easy to find. You can get them at many different places, Amazon, Sam's Club, Walmart. You can even get these at Dollar Tree. However, the canned heat comes in different sizes of cans. So these are 6-hour cans, and they are the Royal Oak brand. And the ones at Dollar Tree are 2-hour cans. And I have not had luck with getting this up to really an acceptable temperature when I've used the dollar store cans. I did not have trouble when I used these. So how this works with the canned heat is you open this little box right here. And this is for something else I'll show you in a little bit. And you just insert the canned heats in here. And then it has this top that goes over the top that you have to have on here when you're using this. And then you would light these. I haven't opened these up. I'm not going to light this right now, but I'll probably have some footage I can insert of a time that we use this. So you would light these both and you would close it up. It has a damper here to control the airflow. And then you would let it get up to temperature. And it does have a nice temperature gauge here to let you keep track of how hot it's getting. Now, I find, honestly, with most dishes, it's really not necessary to preheat an oven. Even when I'm cooking in my regular oven, I usually, unless there's a specific reason why it needs to be preheated first, I usually put my food in while it's heating. And I think that's especially important when you've got some sort of alternative fuel emergency oven, because you don't want to waste your fuel. So you might as well have your dish heating as the oven is heating, rather than just wasting that fuel. Then also, you're not going to have to open it back up when it heats to put in your item, because then you're going to lose some of that heat, which is precious and a little bit harder to achieve with these type of ovens. So this one, it does take a little bit longer to get up to temperature than some of the other options that I've showed you, like especially the propane oven. This takes a little bit longer, but like I said, I put my food in while it's coming up to temperature. Another benefit to this little oven, besides the fact that this is the only one that can be used indoors, is that this can be used with multiple fuels. So it uses the canned heat, but you can also use biomass fuel like sticks and twigs or charcoal or anything. It has a little rack there that you can see that you can put down to build a fire. So you can build a fire in this and use it like that. So it would be like an old-fashioned wood stove oven almost. And that's really where this damper control comes in a lot more handy, is with the actual biomass fire building. That's a great benefit of this oven because you can store a lot of the canned heat fuel. It is inexpensive. It's relatively safe to store, easy to store, but eventually you're going to run out of it. And at that point, this oven is not going to be worthless. You can still use sticks, twigs, anything you find outside to build a fire and still use this oven outdoors. You can't use it indoors with the biomass fuel. This does come with this little damper thing that will help you put out the flames, safely extinguish the flames. The tip of this is designed for measuring the wick, how much wick you're supposed to leave on the canned heat. And you can just put it in just far enough to damp out the first one, because when this reaches the full temperature that you want it to bake at, the way you control the temperature is by damping out the first burner and just leaving one of these cans to burn. And then if you need the temperature, if the temperature starts to drop, you need to raise it up again, you light the other one again. If you're using biomass fuel, you're going to control the temperature with the damper. Another positive thing that I like about this oven is you can see it's a little bit smaller. So it's a little bit easier to store. You can see the sun oven and the propane oven behind it. You can see how it's quite a bit smaller. It's really, really an attractive unit. It also has handles on the sides to carry it around, just like the other ovens do. But that's also one of the drawbacks of this, is that it's not going to hold a 9x13 pan. Just like the little Coleman stovetop oven, this can hold about an 8 or 9 inch square or round pan, or a small muffin tin, a small baking sheet with some biscuits on it or something like that. But if you need to cook something larger, you would have to do it in shifts. It also doesn't have a rack. It's just one big open space, and it's not very big. So that is a drawback to this kind of oven, but honestly, the benefit of being able to use it indoors completely overrides that, in my opinion. Another thing to think about with something like this, if you were using this indoors, is that it would also obviously put off a little bit of heat into your home. So if you were using this during a winter power outage, you'd kind of be getting double duty, because that canned heat would be heating this unit. This unit's going to get hot. It's going to put off a little bit of heat. And then, of course, when you're all done baking, you can open it right up and let all that heat come out into your room. That's what I do in the wintertime with my regular oven. I love it when I'm done baking and I can crack open the door and just let that warmth come into my room. Of course, the other thing I didn't mention is this little thing that came in that little drawer, the thing that comes with it. This is like a fire poker to use if you're burning the biomass fuel. And it also comes with, I don't have it right here, but it comes with a safety cover, so that if you are only burning one can of fuel and you have the other one just sitting in there, it has a cover to put over it to make sure it doesn't reignite. And lastly, I want to talk about my Dutch oven. And this is not just a Dutch oven like you would use for baking in your home, but it's a special type of Dutch oven meant for cooking outdoors and camping and things like that. This is by far the least expensive, most affordable item that I have here. So I feel like this is something that everyone probably should have if you can, because this one's actually just Ozark Trail from Walmart, and I own 2 of these, at least 2, and this is the only one I've ever used, and it works great. So it's really pretty inexpensive for what it is. Now, the way that a Dutch oven like this works, and I learned how to use one of these for cooking and baking like this from one of my son's Cub Scout leaders way back when on a family camp out with the Cub Scouts. So what you do is, it's really designed to be used with charcoal. So you would want to store some charcoal, but you can also use like campfire coals if you don't have charcoal, or if your charcoal doesn't light for you or something, because I've done both. So what you do is you put you can see that it's got these feet on the bottom. So it's got these 3 feet, so it stands right up off the ground. And you put a certain number of coals underneath of the pan, and then you put a certain number of coals on top. You can see that the lid has this lip around it, so it will hold the coals on the top. And there are charts available, and there's books available, and it'll tell you basically how many coals on bottom and how many coals on top and what oven temperature that would equal. We use these every time we go camping. I love to try different Dutch oven recipes and try out different things in the Dutch oven. It's a lot of fun. One thing you can do with these that's really pretty cool is you can actually stack them on top of each other. You can stack them 2 or 3 high, maybe higher than that. I've never dared go any higher than that. But you just use the coals that are on the top of one are going to be the coals on the bottom of the next one. Then you put more coals on the top of that, and you keep on going. And I've actually also put some veggies in a fold pack right on top of the top coals on the top Dutch oven and had a big just dinner stack going. One of our favorite things to do in a Dutch oven like this is to do a dump cake. And we just put any kind of pie filling on the bottom of the pan. And then we just mix a box of cake mix with a can of lemon lime soda, or you could use any soda really, and pour that over the top and let that bake in there. And it makes a delicious cake. You can use any combination of pie fillings and cakes. We have done apple pie filling with like a spice cake on top that would be really good at this time of year, or even a gingerbread cake. You can bake chicken in this. You can bake any kind of casserole type of dish. This particular one, I can't remember the measurements of this Ozark Trail Dutch oven. They only have one size like this. It's probably around 12 inches, but this holds just about exactly the amount that a 9x13 pan would hold. Even though it is not rectangular, it's round, it holds the same amount. The other thing you can do is you can put something inside of a pan, a different pan, like a bread pan, for instance, and put it inside of this Dutch oven. And Dutch ovens are available in many, many different sizes. You can get them much smaller than this, and you can get them even larger than this. You'd have to choose a different brand, like a Lodge brand is one I can think of that's really good, but more expensive. So if you're looking for something really budget, this one is great. It's a really good way to go. Of course, you are going to want to store some charcoal if you have a Dutch oven like this. Store it definitely in a moisture-proof container of some sort. And I also like to keep a charcoal chimney to make it easier to start the charcoal, and some lighter fluid, things like that are going to make it easier to start, because charcoal honestly is my kryptonite. Like I love cooking with the Dutch oven, and I do it every year when we're camping, but I have a hard time getting that charcoal started sometimes, or getting it before it's burned down too much sometimes. I don't know. I just have a really hard time with it. But store some charcoal, everything that you need to use the charcoal. But remember, these can also be used with campfire coals or right over the campfire. I have just stood this on a grate over the campfire plenty of times and just heated from the bottom. So you can also use it just like a regular stew pot and not use it like an oven, just by heating from only the bottom. The downfalls of a Dutch oven like this, well, number one, like I mentioned, it can only be used outdoors. I mean, you could use this pot indoors. If you had a wood stove or something, you could set it on the wood stove, but you can't have the charcoal or the open coals just out on top of the oven, just out of your fireplace or something. So for using it in the traditional way of like baking in it like that, you have to do it outdoors. So that, like any of the outdoor oven options, it's a little bit weather dependent, but of course you can have some kind of a canopy type of covering. You can have some sort of a carport or a porch roof or something like that you can have over you to keep out of the rain and things like that. They do sell tables you can buy that are meant for putting these up on. We actually just recently got one, because otherwise you're working right down on the ground. And sometimes, depending on how nimble you are, that can be a little bit difficult. So I got myself a Dutch oven table to be able to keep the Dutch ovens up at, counter height, waist height, to be easier to work with. So that's something else you can keep in mind. There's tools you can get, like there's a lid lifter that I use all the time that allows you to just lift the lid straight up so that you don't dump any of those coals anytime you're checking on what's in the pot. Another thing to keep in mind when you're cooking with a Dutch oven like this is every so often, like every 15 minutes or so, I believe, you're going to give the pot itself a quarter turn clockwise. It has a handle you can use to lift it, and then you're going to give the lid a quarter turn in the opposite direction, and that's going to keep the heat even all throughout the pan and make for even baking. This is, of course, a little bit easier to store. I mean, it's not teeny tiny, but it's easier to store than a lot of the other options that I've shown today. And you can get them in different sizes. If you have several different sizes, you could even nest them inside of one another. We have 2 of the same size, so we keep them in the box they came in, actually. But they're definitely easier to store than a lot of other options, and they have a lot of multiple uses. So I definitely recommend anyone get one of these if you can and practice working with it, because it's actually a lot of fun. There are a couple of other ways to bake things that I alluded to earlier. These use items you might already have right on hand. You can bake in your grill, actually. So if you have a grill and you have fuel for your grill, you may be all set. To bake this way, it's best to use indirect heat, meaning you would heat your grill up and then turn off the burners on one side or move the charcoal to one side if you're using charcoal, and then put the item you want to bake on the side without the heat. The heat will still circulate and the lid of the grill will keep it contained, but the indirect heat will be more like the environment in an oven. Another thing you may be able to do, depending on what it is that you need to bake, is steam baking. This works well for things like muffins or quick breads. You put the item in a large pot containing a little bit of water that does not come up over the sides of the pan that your batter is in. Keep the water at a simmer and the lid on the pot and simmer until your bread or muffins are cooked through. This can also work with certain other dishes as well. I first learned about this method of making steamed breads at Girl Scouts with my daughters. We made steamed muffins for breakfast by putting the muffin batter in unwaxed paper cups in a big pot of simmering water, like I just described. I know there are other options out there, but for this video, I wanted to share things that I've personally used myself. Let me know down below if you have something different that you use for off-grid baking. If you're looking for some recipes, I have a playlist full of emergency meal kits and one of emergency meals in a jar that you can check out that have many recipes you could bake in these ovens. If you made it all the way to the end of the video, leave me a cake emoji down in the comments and check out this video next to see my emergency kitchen kit in a box. I'm Jera with Wicked Prepared. Survive today, thrive tomorrow. We'll see you next time.